Going back to the First World War, Piłsudski and Trzaskowski, they spent 15 months together in Magdeburg. They were debating on exactly what to do once they got back to Poland, how this process of regaining independence would look like. And as time passed, it started to look increasingly likely. So they were preparing for what would be. Nevertheless, there were also other centers of authority and power in Poland. It wasn't evident at that moment that it would be Piłsudski who would take the reins, but he had worked up such a reputation, such an authority as the leader of these Polish legions in Austria, even before the First War, really, when he was a socialist revolutionary of the PPS party, the Polish Socialist Party. That party was going in two directions, you could say. One was the more further to the left, the parts which emphasized the communist nature of socialism, of that dream that many communists of the time had of a brotherhood of workers around the world without any allegiance to specific nations or even less borders. When the First World War broke out, that was an illusion that was shattered for many socialist workers. The working class of Europe happily marched away into the armies of their respective countries. Piłsudski had been proven right, as in the years leading up to the First World War. He had also held that position that for him, socialism was a tool of national liberation, as it was the main movement and ideology of the time that had a chance to unseat the Russian Tsar. And in this case as well, just as in the outcome of the First World War, his prediction was correct. The Russian Tsar and the Russian Empire fell in 1917 with the Russian Revolution. So those who claim, and there are many of them in Poland, who claim that Piłsudski was a visionary who had a great feel for international politics, they were also correct about that. During his time in the Magdeburg Castle, he was scheming in various ways. He was allowed to correspond with other Poles. He had also created, as a part of these legions, the so-called Polish military organization. This was, you could say, probably an early or a predecessor to all Polish secret services that have existed since. Naturally, there was no ideological continuation between the secret services of the Polish Second Republic and those of the Polish People's Republic, the communist state after the Second World War, but nevertheless they served the same function. So the Polish military organization, it was not limited to Austria-Hungary as his legions were. The agents and people working for that organization were spread out also in Germany and in Russia itself. These were the people that were creating, you could say, the environment on the ground for this national resurgence. The Germans, they did try to stop his communication at certain points. Sometimes they were censoring him, but still he was able to communicate, at times at least, quite freely with other Poles. In the meanwhile, the Regency Council in Poland was trying its hardest to expand the scope of its authority. The Germans were naturally pushing back, but with time they had to make more and more gradual concessions. There was a temporary government that was formed, but also this government was, just as the Regency Council itself, and a parliament. This was not something that was independent, but as time passed on, things changed. And in 1917, with the Russian Revolution, it was one of the three occupying powers, partitioning powers, was taken out of the game. Soon after the October Revolution, the Soviet Bolsheviks, they started looking for peace options with the Germans. They wanted to trade territory for time. So in the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, they gave up enormous territories to the Germans, nearly all of Ukraine, nearly all of Belarus, the Baltic states of today, naturally, and also what had been their part of Poland, so to say. So interestingly, the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, were the second power in the world after the Americans that recognized Polish independence. The Americans also played an important part. On January 8th, 1918, Woodrow Wilson presented his famous 13 points, in which he envisioned how the world should look like after an Allied Entente victory in the First World War. One of those 13 points was an independent Poland. So his support naturally had a lot of importance for how this issue was also perceived by other powers. So the French, the British position, they didn't really have anything against it, but maybe they were not as forceful in their support for an independent Poland. Maybe a little bit more in the case of France than the UK, as in France. You had a large Polish army, the so-called Blue Army of General Haller, which was under the so-called Polish National Liberation Committee. This was one of those centers of authority and power that I mentioned before, that it wasn't certain that it would be Piłsudski that would take power. The French were pushing for Józef Haller and his Blue Army as being the representatives of the Polish cause of independence. This finally came to a big conclusion in the autumn of 1918. The German army started maybe not collapsing. The army was still holding up as good as it could, which is why later on Adolf Hitler came with his Dolchstoß legend, or the stab in the back, the conspiracy theory, because there was huge turmoil in Germany. The British naval blockade. It has to be said that the British did this very well. They managed to seal off Germany from a lot of natural resources and trade from the world oceans. In the autumn of 1918, you had more or less starvation in parts of Germany, and you had this general demoralization in which the civilian population was no longer willing to suffer for the cause of the war effort. There was also a socialist revolution or communist revolution brewing, both among the civilians and among parts of the military forces, and in the end, it all crumbled, and Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to resign, abdicate, and to leave. In connection with this, things started unfolding more and more quickly. The Poles were slightly surprised by the speed of events. You had on November 1st, you had a rebellion breaking out among the Ukrainians in Galicia. They took control of several cities or tried to besiege them. The Poles considered some of them as obvious Polish lands. The cities of Przemyśl or Lwów or Lviv were among them. So the Poles very quickly started mobilizing for fighting against the Ukrainians in that part of the country.
Adam, the clock in the corner of the studio is blinking at me, so I'm afraid we must bring this program to an end. Thank you. We'll pick it up next time. There we are. I've had to interrupt Adam almost in mid-sentence, but fear not. If you join us next time, as we hope you will, we'll continue the story. In the meantime, thank you for watching Poland Daily History.